In the now-beloved holiday film Elf, comedian Will Ferrell has a madcap adventure in the real world after spending much of his life working as one of Santa's little helpers in the North Pole, learning the true meaning of Christmas and family along the way. It's heartwarming, sweet, and exactly the kind of fare we expect from a seasonal movie. And I ought to know, I've written a few. But did you know that the notion of Santa's elves, while time-honored iconography of the holiday, have a far darker origin? In fact, some might say that these little sprites are downright deadly. Greetings and welcome to the History of Fright. I'm your host, Micahel Varrati. This week, we're going to delve into the sinister foundations of Santa's most trusted sidekicks. As many scholars of seasonal delights will tell you, much of the holiday traditions we now associate with Christmas have their roots in pre-Christian and pagan practices. For example, the Christmas tree is often traced to Viking and Saxon rituals, wherein the worship of trees was considered to be commonplace. Similarly, the idea of holiday elves predate our notion of their holly jolly persona, and in fact go back farther than even Santa himself.
You need to hide.
As near as most historians can tell, the idea of elves have their roots in early Germanic paganism. Believed to be magical beings who had the ability to control the perceptions of normal people, elves were not necessarily initially considered creatures to fear, but definitely creatures to appease. Centuries ago, the people of Scandinavia believed that elves kept a close eye over the homes of humans. It was thought that if you were good to elves, they would be good to you. However, if you weren't, great darkness and nastiness would befall your family. But how exactly does one make sure they are doing right by elves, you ask? That's where the horror starts coming in. It was believed that humans were required to leave an offering to the elves in order to keep them happy. In fact, in some cultures, the gifts were placed inside shoes and left on the doorstep in hopes that elves would arrive in the night and snatch them up. Not only is this considered to be one of the potential origins of the Christmas stocking, but also was later reversed in certain European countries where it became practice to leave your shoes out for St. Nicholas to place a treat inside. However, if gifts or offerings weren't left behind, it was believed that elves would turn malicious, and all unfortunate luck from bad crops to disease to death would be the result of the elves' ill will. As the centuries wore on, the extent of the elves' wickedness increased in legend, including in some European folklore that suggested that elves had a hunger for human flesh and would eat those who crossed them. In some ways, the perception of elves was contingent on the behavior of the people they watched over. Good behavior was rewarded, bad behavior was punished most violently and severely. As such, it could be argued that this was the first precursor to the notion of Santa's naughty or nice list, and the idea that someone is always watching. Unfortunately, in this case, if you were naughty, the result wasn't cold, but likely a violent, bloody death. Which, if you think about it, gives the whole elf on the shelf thing an extra layer of dread. Much like the elves of yesteryear, this popular toy is supposed to watch over you during the holidays, but do you really want it to? By the 1800s, the general perception of elves as we know them today began to replace the superstitions of the old world, reimagined by author Louisa May Alcott as benevolent Christmas entities for a book in 1856, but also due in part to an 1823 poem by Clement Clarke Moore that suggested St. Nicholas himself might be part elf. With a far gentler and, let's face it, commercial concept of what elves could be, the darker aspects of their legacy soon fell away, and we were left with the bright and shiny holiday assistants we know and love today. But horror has a long memory, and the modern era of monster movies has done right by elves of yesteryear, bringing their more monstrous attributes out of folklore and back to life on the silver screen. Movies like 1985's Legend, directed by acclaimed filmmaker Ridley Scott, went back to the pagan roots of the elvish lore, portraying them as wicked beasts in servitude to darkness rather than Santa. More so, following on the heels of the success of Gremlins, Hollywood was looking for other pint-sized beasties that they could turn into bankable creature features. Thus came 1989's Elves, starring TV's Grizzly Adams, Dan Haggerty. Now, if you haven't heard of the movie Elves, that's okay. It didn't quite make the dent that Gremlins did, but it did eventually find a niche audience amongst appreciative fans. However, this particular horror entry did right by elf folklore and restored the more menacing aspects of the magical creatures, making them more likely to tear you apart than build you toys. Other films, like 2017's The Elf and 2015's A Christmas Horror Story, pulled both from pop culture perceptions of elves and old folklore of malicious woodland creatures to ensure that the more frightening aspects of these holiday legends don't completely fade away. Maybe it's for the best that elves underwent a transformation over the centuries into festive beings rather than their flesh-eating beginnings. So this holiday season, keep a watch out for elves because they may just be watching you. Until next time. Hey, thanks for watching History of Fright. We will be back next week with more spookiness. For more horror, follow our friends at Dread Central, and don't forget to follow Gammaray across the web.